All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Earth Day panel, Climate Emotions and the Public Service, an intergenerational discussion. This event is co-hosted by the National Youth Network at Environment and Climate Change Canada and together with the Federal Youth Network. My name is Antonia. I use she, her pronouns, and to visually describe myself, I am a white woman with long blonde hair wearing a black button-up shirt. Please note that we are hosting separate English and French sessions today, and we hosted our French session earlier this afternoon. To view the French session, check out the Fin YouTube channel where the recording will be posted within 24 hours. And to begin, I'd like to start with by acknowledging that we are all gathered from across Canada, and I am currently located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which I am joining you from today. Jajage, Montreal is historically known as the gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples in what is currently known as Montreal. I encourage all of you to acknowledge the land that you're joining us on from as well, and you can refer to your area anytime using the link, the native land link that will be put in the chat. All right. So as we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button. You can vote for your questions that you like the best. So you can upvote them by clicking on the thumbs up button. This will prioritize all the votes that the majority want to hear from first, and then we'll be able to prioritize the questions as they come. As with all Fin sessions, this session will be recorded, so you can go back and check out the recording and the insights that we'll gather from our great and diverse speakers today at any point later on. We would also like to note that the slides for each session are also included on Fin's wiki page, so you can follow along throughout today's session or reference them later as well. So before we get started, we'd like to set the tone for today's topic, and we do have a couple of polling questions for you all to participate in, so we can get a sense of where you're joining us from in terms of the knowledge of today's topic. So if we're ready, you should see the first question in any moment. I'm not sure if you see it. Yeah, perfect. So the first question, have you experienced climate anxiety? So this could be any form of climate anxiety within, outside of the workplace. Yes, no, I'm not sure. And the second question, have you ever spoken about climate change or climate emotions at work, in the workplace? Yes or no? There's no, I'm not sure there. We'll give everybody a moment to please fill out the polls. And in viewing the results, exactly what we expected. So a resounding yes as majority for both questions. And these are two subjects we'll be diving into today with our panels and our speakers that are with us. So thank you all for filling that out. Now that we have a bit of an understanding of where we're all coming from, we can dive into the topic of today, which is climate emotions and the public service. So to better introduce myself, I think we will be sharing the slides any minute. Just wait for those. I'm sure if they are up. They might be up, and I might just not be viewing them. Oh, they are not up. All right. Okay. We will troubleshoot. Perfect. No need to troubleshoot. We are here. So in referencing the slides and diving into today's topic, climate emotions and the public service. Just to better introduce myself, my name, as mentioned earlier, is Antonia Macris. I am the co-chair of the National Youth Network and the manager of corporate learning at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Together, I'm with you to here together with my co-chair, Moretta, and we will be presenting on the importance of today's topic, our initiatives around the topic with the Youth Network, and its impact across the public service. To learn more about us or any of the speakers today, you can refer to our biographies, which are in the slides anytime. And we have a lineup of very rich, diverse experts to hear from today. I will now pass it over to my co-chair of the Youth Network, Moretta. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Antonia. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm having some connectivity issues today, of course, classic. But my name is Marita. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm co-chair of ECCC's National Youth Network with Antonia. And I'm a white woman with short brown hair wearing a blue shirt today. So off to the next slide to start off. We wanted to share a bit about our network and why climate emotions matter to us. So the mandate of Environment and Climate Change Canada's National Youth Network, the NYN, is to give voice to younger generations of Environment and Climate Change Canada employees who don't always have the same opportunities, given we occupy more junior roles typically, but we do have a lot to contribute, from challenging the status quo to creative thinking and experimentation to bold visions for what the future of Canada, our environment, and the department could look like. So climate anxiety is one of many focus areas that has emerged for young employees at ECCC, and we are excited to see the interest from across the federal family here today because climate change affects all of us. We were also honored to be celebrated for our efforts at the National Capital Region Young Professional Network Champion Awards evening, a long mouthful of a name, last fall with the Lucky Bamboo Award, which recognizes a youth professional network that has been consistently active and strives to push the envelope. And at that event is actually where we had the genesis for this event here today. So on the next slide, before really kicking things off, we wanted to note that climate emotions and climate anxiety can be sensitive subjects for a lot of us. So please know that support is available to public service employees through the Employee Assistance Program whenever you need it. So we'll put a link to how to access that in the chat. So now we can finally dive in, heading to the next slide. Let's talk about climate anxiety. And one of the most important things you can do to address climate change is to talk about it. So we're super excited that everyone is here today to join the discussion. So on the next slide, youth care about climate change, but we can feel discouraged and disempowered without the power and influence to affect change, which can lead to climate anxiety. Climate anxiety, also known as eco-anxiety, can be defined as distress related to the climate crisis and includes emotions like worry, fear, sadness, anger, grief, guilt, hope, you name it, really. So this is a problem in Canada, with data showing that 4 in 10 Canadians experience worry regarding climate change, which is the dominant emotional response. And twice as many respondents say they are very worried compared to very hopeful. So that's something that should concern us all. So while eco or climate anxiety are normal psychological responses to the climate crisis, the problem is that eco-anxiety can lead to disengagement in climate action and burnout, which prevents the community building needed to address the climate crisis. For young employees and youth in particular, the challenge of managing climate emotions can be very acute because it affects our daily lives since we've been living in times of crisis our whole lives. So the bottom of the slide here, I put some data from 1999, which is when I was born. The levels of carbon dioxide, which is one of the greenhouse gases that contributes to climate change, levels in the atmosphere were 368 parts per million, which is already above safe levels of 350 parts per million. So growing up and living your whole life in a time of crisis can start to weigh on you and create challenges to the solutions that we need, as well as when our future well-being hinges on action today. It's a bit of a daunting thought to have. So on the next slide, we wanted to highlight that anxiety isn't the only emotional response to climate change. So here on the slide, we have a whole range of emotions that you might feel when you think about climate change or when you experience climate impacts. So we invite you all and throughout the discussion today to reflect on what emotions, what feelings speak to your experience today when you think about climate change or when you think about Earth Day, loss, overwhelm, outrage, inspiration, whole range of emotions there. I'll pass it over to Antonia for the next slide.
Thank you so much, Marita. So why does it matter? Why does this matter to the federal public service? So eco-anxiety presents a growing risk to employee well-being, which can lead to a sense of helplessness, demotivation, which could lead to decreased productivity or loss of focus. It is especially prevalent among employees working on climate, such as that we've seen at ECCC, when the urgency of the crisis isn't reflected in the pace of a government response or but it is something that is common across all departments because we're all experiencing climate emotions in our lives in various areas, not only within work. This can create risks for employee retention and to values and ethics, particularly when staying on the sidelines in public discourse on climate change and when it doesn't feel like an option to youth who see these issues as existential. Employees can benefit from addressing causes of eco-anxiety, such as helping employees to take collective measures for the environment. And interventions that address eco-anxiety can promote well-being and promote interventions that address eco-anxiety and promote well-being in the workplace are crucial to building a responsive federal public service and healthy communities by helping to build empathy and trust within and beyond government. We'll go to the next slide, please. All right, so climate care at ECCC's National Youth Network. So we wanted to spotlight some ways that the NYN has been addressing climate anxiety at ECCC in case they inspire you to start conversations in your own team or to get involved with us or your own youth networks. So the Climate Anxiety Subcommittee of our National Youth Network, we've hosted drop-in climate coffee chats each month that give employees an informal, brave space to discuss climate anxiety concerns. These drop-ins have provided vital space for people to process their emotions, to build community, and to share resources and solutions. We've regularly shared resources on climate literacy with our members because improved knowledge about climate change and its solutions, including how to take effective action in your workplace and communities, can help alleviate climate anxiety. And lastly, last year with the NYN, we've hosted 2 events in our eco-anxiety speaker series on climate emotions and solutions. So we hope to host more events like these moving forward to give young employees access to environmental education, to promote collective coping, and to demonstrate that actions that make a difference may help combat climate anxiety. We'll go next slide, please. So now that we've covered the basics of climate emotions, we're ready to dive into the discussions with our amazing guest speakers today. As we do so, we invite you to reflect on some of these questions on the screen or take them with you afterwards, after today's discussion into your workplace or into your teams or into your daily lives. And some of these include, what climate emotions are you feeling today? What terms resonate with you from today that you take away with you? And how might you start conversations about climate change or climate emotions in the workplace? So without further ado, we would like to pass off the virtual mic over to Michael Bonser, who is our youth champion here at ECCC and the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for the Strategic Policy and International Affairs Branch. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Antonia, and thank you everyone for being here today for what I think is a really important conversation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I should have started. My pronouns are he, him, and of course I want to acknowledge as well that here in Ottawa we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and we honor their enduring presence on this land and express gratitude for their stewardship of these territories throughout the generations. The topic we're talking about today is probably a topic that we don't talk about enough, particularly at ECCC, but throughout the public service. And Antonia and Moretta presented some really interesting data points in the opening today. And I would say here, I hope as you walk away from today's discussion, you think about how do you express your climate anxiety? How are you talking about it, not only with colleagues or through the youth network or opportunities like this, but with your own bosses, with your own managers, with your colleagues? Because I think it's very important that we do that. I think it's very important as an organization that we validate, we as a leadership team validate those feelings, those concerns. They're real, they're genuine, and they're born out of the work that you do and what you see day in and day out. I work in a very international environment here as the associate assistant deputy minister of strategic policy and international affairs. I mean, that's been the bulk of my experience, and I can tell you that I personally have felt that climate anxiety in working through major international events. In part because the science is so clear about the unprecedented and rapid cuts that are required to global greenhouse emissions. Um, if we're going to keep the goals of the Paris Agreement alive. And despite the science, that reality often stands in stark contrast to international processes and negotiations where achieving consensus and furthering ambition is really difficult to do and can be exacerbated by many other factors, including, the constantly evolving international geopolitical context. And I don't have to tell you on this call that that's become more uncertain and more challenging now than perhaps at any point in my professional career, and likely yours as well. The challenges in maintaining trust between countries, and particularly around questions of burden sharing and financing and who's most responsible, and how are we going to conquer these issues together. It can really be easy to lose perspective when you're in the middle of an international negotiation that individual efforts matter, that the efforts do matter. Whether it's an individual, a community, or a country, everything we do, every step we take does matter. But in the big picture, that sometimes does get lost, and that creates a sense of anxiety. I know it has for my fabulous negotiating teams at COPs and in other fora, but it has for me as well. And then finally, the recognition of the accelerating climate-related disasters and urgency to achieve results. While global climate efforts just simply don't show those immediate results from time to time, and then it exacerbates those feelings of how much is enough, how can we do more and better. And the interaction of these factors causes genuine frustration, genuine sense, and at times I think perhaps a sense of whether or not we can actually make that difference. And the truth is we can. And I hope that you see that in your day-to-day work, that the efforts that we take every day as part of this department, as part of representatives of the federal public service, they do matter. And the fact that you're participating in this important discussion today with these great panelists to come tells me just how important that you think these issues are. Because while progress is slow, and it's way slower than it needs to be, we know that. But we are making progress. And for every 0.1 degree Celsius temperature change that we can affect, we are making progress. And while I know it feels it almost feels trite when I say that we are ahead of where we thought we might be. The original targets for the end of the century were 3.7 to 4.8 degrees. We now, UNEP's emission reports tell us that we are on track for 2.6 by the end of the century. That is not nearly enough. We have to do more. But it tells us that progress is possible. And so I hope that you take heart in that and know that the efforts that you undertake day in and day out don't go unnoticed by the government, by the people of Canada, but also make a real difference in the policy decisions that governments will have to make. Today is all about how do we validate our emotions? How do we express those anxieties and emotions? But also then how do we manage and channel those emotions? And, because I think it's really important to understand that emotions power us into taking action. They power us into perhaps trying to go further, exploring solution sets that may be beyond what we thought might be possible. But it is important that we stay informed, that we understand the facts, that we understand the opportunities, and we're realistic about the challenges. But don't lose sight of the important factor that emotion can bring to your work day in and day out as a positive, I call it a force multiplier, but it certainly is a positive influencer in terms of pushing for the best possible policymaking. It's really important to stay proactive, to find ways to channel those emotions you may feel into positive momentum and concrete action, whether it's in the workplace within the federal public service or within spaces in our communities or with groups of peers. it's important that we continue to try to explore the most creative solutions possible, to push the boundaries of policy where we can. And that's all part of providing as a public servant your very best advice. Governments will then take those decisions. But if we are consistent and committed to providing that best advice, I believe we can make a real difference. And I think that's a really important way for us to channel some of those anxieties that we feel into positive emotion and a positive sense of what we can do as individuals within our organization to make that difference. I know that's easier said than done. I know that those anxieties are real, and I know we have a lot to do. But I hope that we can continue this kind of conversation beyond today into the months and years to come. That this is an important step forward in terms of understanding, acknowledging, and I hope channeling some of those anxieties into more proactive effort as we go forward. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'm going to pass the floor back to our fabulous moderators for the speakers to come.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining the discussion today and for your honesty about your own experiences with climate anxiety in the workplace and how we can channel those productively, as well as for your efforts to uplift youth voices as our youth champion at Environment Canada. So thanks so much. I would now like to start our dialogue for today. So I'm going to take a few minutes to welcome the wonderful panelists we are fortunate to have with us today. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Paul McDonald. Paul is a member of the Moose Cree First Nation with family connections to Labrador Inuit. He is the director of the Indigenous Science Division and co-chair of the Indigenous Employees Network. Paige Hunter is a climate organizer with over a decade of experience in climate action and also my best friend. And at Environment and Climate Change Canada, she supports youth engagement and environmental literacy and leads the National Youth Network's Climate Anxiety Subcommittee. Outside of ECCC, she leads the Sword Fern Collective, which is an emotion-centered community engagement organization that bridges climate action with arts and culture. Rachel Milena Chan is a climate storyteller and an outreach specialist with the Canadian Centre for Climate Services. Outside of ECCC, Rachel runs Eco-Anxious Stories, where she shares narratives and practices at the intersection of mental health and climate change. And last but not least, Erin Murray is a poet and a policy advisor at ECCC. Erin's passion for dialogue and mental wellness have made her a leader in the department, where she shares her lived experiences and tools for resilience with staff of all ages. So super excited for the discussion today. Our goal is to have an intergenerational dialogue with senior and junior staff because we're all experiencing climate emotions in our professional as well as personal lives. So we've asked each of our guests today to prepare a question for their fellow panelists, and we'll be answering some audience Q&A near the end of the event today. So I'm going to start off with inviting Rachel to ask her question of Paige, and then after Paige responds, we can open it up to an answer from another panelist if they wish to jump in. And I also just wanted to invite all panelists to self-describe when you introduce yourself for accessibility purposes. So over to you, Rachel, to start us off.
Hi guys, my mic working okay coming through?
Yeah.
Awesome. My name is Rachel Molina Chan. As Miranda said, thanks so much for the intro. My accessibility description is I'm a white woman with shoulder-length red hair and a rusty red button-up shirt on today. And as you said, I've got a question for Paige. Paige, I'm a storyteller. I like to think in narrative, and I'm always thinking about things in terms of like plot points, in terms of the mobilizing moments that move us through our lives and our stories. So I'm curious for you, do you
Oh, we might have momentarily lost your sound, Rachel.
Should I come back?
Yes, you're back.
Sorry, guys. I don't know why the internet gods are cursing me today. Do you remember a turning point, Paige, when you felt like climate change became real to you, when you kind of realized like the stakes of the story for yourself or for your career? Hopefully I'll stay on for your full answer.
No worries. Thank you so much, Rachel. And yeah, it's It's always fun when we have internet issues right when we're doing something really exciting. So sometimes that's just how it happens, but we've got it. So hi everyone, I'm Paige. I use she, her pronouns. And as a descriptor, I am a white woman with curly red hair, and I'm wearing a white button-up shirt today. Rachel, I just want to thank you so much for your question because this was a really, it was good to reflect on this for me too. It was very interesting to think about what really started me in my climate work. As Marina mentioned, I have been involved in climate action for over 10 years now, which is really quite a wild thing to think of. So, and I was trying to think of the point that really started me on that. And for me, it was, in a sense, some of the extreme impacts of climate change that I witnessed here in Vancouver. So, when I was around 15 or 16 years old, that was when I first started seeing wildfire smoke during the summer. And that idea of just it being unsafe to be in my neighborhood, for example, or it being unsafe to go outside, it was very much an immediate climate impact that started resonating with me and reminding me like, oh, this is real, this is happening, and this is something that is very, very serious. And during those years as well, it's a very pivotal time in your life. You know, your mid-teens, your mid to late teens, you're trying to decide where you're going to go. And so for me, I think that's what steered me in the direction of climate change was those wildfire impacts. And for those of you that are based in BC, you know that sometimes we joke about now it being so common that we almost have a wildfire season in addition to the normal 4 seasons. So in terms of that being a pivotal moment for climate change, and then I started getting into climate emotions specifically. Similarly, I've realized that wildfire is kind of a through line throughout my whole climate journey. I have a lot of family that lives in the Okanagan, and now it's very common for them to be under evacuation orders every summer. And some of them are very young or have very young children, and that lasting emotional impact on them, you know, cannot really be understated when you feel like your neighborhood or even your very home is not a safe place for you to be as well. And while I live in an urban setting in Vancouver, in what's, you know, sometimes called the wet coast, we know from some of the wildfires that we saw in LA in an urban setting earlier this year that even cities, especially in Vancouver, where we're having hotter, drier summers, are not necessarily immune to some of these climate impacts that we think of as being, you know, out there. And it's interesting, like the background that I have here today is from a photo of really a park very close to where I live, and it's even got wildfire smoke in here as well. So this is from a couple summers ago. This was like a huge hike that I'd prepared for all summer. And the one day I decided to do it, that very morning, we started getting a huge amount of smoke nearby. So it really is, that's how it's sort of infiltrating my life. And I know that sometimes that might feel like a bit of a grim note to start on. But it just reminded me both of the reality and also what's at stake in our climate future. And however, I continue to do a lot of this climate work because even though we're facing some of these extremes, we are facing them in communities. And wildfire for me is also where I see community showing up and those relationships really being strengthened. You know, I see people supporting elderly members of their community. I see people supporting strangers as well that they might not know, that they just see have a need. So I think that witnessing how we're able to lean on each other, build these tight-knit communities, and have these incredible creative climate solutions, including in the public service, is what gives me so much of that hope that Michael was alluding to as well for the solutions that we can implement today and in our future. So I will leave it there.
Shivers, Paige, thank you so much. Also being from Vancouver, I connect with a lot of that, the impact of smoke and everything that you shared. So thanks so much for adding that personal touch. I think we'll let you now, Paige, turn your next question over to Paul, and we'll let other people weigh in with other answers when we get to the Q&A, because I think we'll have a lively discussion today. So go ahead, Paige.
Yeah, thank you so much. Paul, one thing I really want to know is over your career, both in the public service as well as outside of it, have you noticed a change in the acceptance of climate emotions in the workplace?
Yes, thanks, Paige. And before I answer, yes, for a physical description of myself, always a fun exercise to do and reflecting on that. I am a 50-plus-year-old man, I'll say that. Not much hair left, but what is there is dark brown, wearing a blue shirt with a dark blue vest today. Yeah, so I guess in terms of context for my career, and specifically my career with ECCC, it spans about 20 years. So when I reflect on this question, I'm thinking about this in two parts. So first is how the messaging on climate change has changed. So recall back then, way sketch, we were Environment Canada, not Environment and Climate Change Canada. So it was very much a very different discussion to begin with in the early 2000s. There was a very different level of acceptance for the idea that humans were able to impact the Earth's climate. I recall a lot of discussion, in my community, my elders speaking about the changes in weather patterns and seasons, the effect that this was having on wildlife, as well as the activities of the elders themselves or people in the communities. But really, these were framed really in the local level, regional kind of discussions, and it's another kind of step to take to think about this on the global scale. And I think there were a few news stories and journal articles and those kind of things, but really you had to look for it, and it really was, if you wanted to avoid this, you could, if you chose not to know, you chose not to think about climate change, you didn't have to. But as the threat of the impacts on our future increased, with new scientific modeling and forecast, so too did the media attention. And you could say that, climate change started going mainstream around this time. And if you think of some things like, for example, like I think about An Inconvenient Truth. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that, with the Al Gore coming out, and yeah, a lot of different opinions and reactions to to that documentary. I'm sure I probably haven't seen that in 20 years, so maybe I should go back and look at it and see what my thoughts might be on that. But yeah, I think it really started a conversation and the back and forth, and climate change really being a symptom of a broken relationship with our planet. As a public servant at that time, working to restore our relationship, you often felt that great responsibility, a lot of pressure to do things like that's your job, right? So, but it was just kind of like it was at work. That's what you're doing. And I guess as kind of to offset a lot of the naysayers that this isn't happening, this isn't human caused. A lot more effort was put into climate science, and as we learned more, climate scientists felt the need to ring the alarm bell. There was time for action. It was becoming more and more urgent, and now, of course, that messaging seems to be everywhere. I think the first time that I realized like the side effect of all these warnings was at the beginning of one of my it was a teleconference. It was before Teams then, but a team call, probably about just over 10 years ago, where one of my colleagues, we're kind of doing the intros as we're getting ready to jump into our agenda, and one of our colleagues was obviously a little frazzled, and it was just that she'd been up all night because her child had been having nightmares after watching a news story on climate change, and it's kind of when I was like, oh, this is really starting to affect people, not just in the department, but people in their real lives and working with their children, and it just becomes part of society that people are dealing with now. So here we are in ECCC, now the department known as Environment and Climate Change Canada. We're faced with news, updates, and warnings almost every day. You're dealing directly with all the challenges, whether it's administrative or otherwise, and trying to move things forward, and yeah, it can feel slow, and sometimes you do wonder, is this impossible, and what are we doing? So of course, staff, there are times when you're going to be prone to that eco anxiety, and I've definitely seen that increase, I think, over the span of my career with ECCC. So Now I'll say this kind of frames the second part of the question, which is, have I noticed a change in the acceptance of climate emotions in the workplace? So the short answer is yes. And I would say as the root of climate-related anxiety has gone up, I've also seen an overall change in how the department addresses mental health in general. So in reality, of course, there's usually different kinds of stressors affecting an employee at any one time. So if you have to look at this in kind of in individual basis and whatever someone's going through at the time. But I guess within the department, there have been some changes in terms of specifically some changes I've seen include training for managers, how to deal with mental health, messaging and resources for employees, such as employee assistance program, the ombuds office, just to name a few. But also, I think I won't say more importantly, but I think in terms of the ongoing, the day to day, I've seen a change in making space for talking to someone, for getting that support. And I think it is better recognized that there are a number of factors affecting employees, and that your mental health, your emotional health, are related to your physical health and well-being. So one of these factors is definitely climate related, particularly in our department. So that stress and all those factors. So I guess just maybe leave some more time for other people to have ask questions and maybe get into some of these things in a little more detail. But I guess in a shorter sum, I'd say in my opinion, there is more openness for these kinds of discussions, and I'm seeing more of these spaces. So whether it's training or formal sessions, but just amongst peers as well as with management. So thank you for your question. I'll send that back to the moderator.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, really, really great to hear your insights over the course of your career, and of course the climate news and impacts have gotten worse. But hopefully some of the discussions are getting better around mental health in the workplace. So that's good to hear as well. I'll turn next to Erin. If you would like to ask your question of Rachel now, I invite you to do so.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rita. Erin here, and for those on the call, I am a white woman also with red hair, though it's currently fire engine red, and I have it worn tied back, wearing a green shirt and a black blazer. So my question for you, Rachel, you talk so much about storytelling and about sharing these experiences, and when we're hearing so many hard, tough feelings and emotions, and it's important to validate those, it's also important to find the resiliency and hope in it. And what do you do to feel more hopeful and resilient in the face of climate change and all of this going on?
Thanks for your question, Erin. We'll see if my internet holds, and I'm sure the moderators will figure it out if it doesn't. I love this question. I think it's a challenging one. But when I think about how to feel more hopeful and resilient, I always have to start with just the framework of befriending all my climate emotions. Befriending is the term I prefer. Not managing or coping with, but actually getting to know these feelings, and not just the positive ones. So yes, hope and resiliency are in there. But I like how Leslie Davenport, she's a climate psychologist, she puts this in terms of like hosting a big party of all of your emotions and letting them visit you, and that doesn't mean getting stuck in the corner all night with anxiety. You don't want to necessarily get into that mode. But this idea of welcoming my emotions has been a game changer for me. And of course, I want to feel hopeful and resilient all the time, but I can't open the door to those emotions without also welcoming in grief and anxiety, feeling overwhelmed and feeling powerless and feeling lonely. And that's why climate storytelling is so important to me, because I think by connecting around those less comfortable emotions, we build the solidarity and the systems of care that produce things like hope and resiliency. And so when I think about climate storytelling, I sometimes do workshops with young folks, and I use my hand as a mnemonic device, and I say, this is healthy, thumbs up, point around the room, this is normal, other people feel this way too. I won't flip you the bird, but the middle finger represents my climate anger and frustration. And I like to use that finger to think about how I'm not to blame personally, but I am that hand at a time when a lot of things need to happen. And so my ring finger, I used to think about how our emotions connect us, and my pinky finger, how our emotions move us. We're so small and weak, but when we link up together, we can do so much together. And I think storytelling is a great way to find that shared sense of reality, of what's possible. And so in my workshops, I talk about following the feeling, like think about how you feel and then follow that feeling. Like think about the context that makes that feeling real. Think about the cast of characters in your climate story. And that would be my third point, is just to look to those other folks in this big climate story who are already crafting systems of care despite overwhelming challenges. And that might not be through the lens of climate change. You know, I look at marginalized communities who have had to learn how to take care of each other when the system has failed them. Another writer I really love is Anais Heglar, and she talks about how this is not the first existential crisis that humankind has faced. It's just been a more targeted existential crisis for people of color, people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples. And so I look to see how social movements have shifted the needle and created these amazing tipping points throughout history. You know, that makes me feel like there's room for me in a bigger story that might even outlive me, you know, or that has come way before me. So I'll just finish with this one more name drop, because there's just so many people I've learned from in this space. But Sally Gillespie is another author with a background in climate psychology. And I shared a quote of hers on our Instagram page recently. And she said, "The best compass for grounded hope is the purpose and joy that accompanies care and connection. Acting for hope fruits hope." And that one's just been ringing around in my head lately. It's just like such a nice way to think about how we get to hope and resiliency through care and connection. And so the more we talk like this, and the more we connect around, whether it's work or just common interests or common values or common challenges, I think we're moving in the right direction. Thanks for your question, Erin.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel. You were getting so many heart reactions as you spoke. So I'm glad that that's kind of the sense that we're instilling in the discussion today. Really excited to come away with some of those hopeful thoughts and actions, hopefully, as well. So thanks so much. Finally, before we turn over to Q&A, I'll invite Paul, if you wouldn't mind asking your question to Erin.
Great, thanks. I think I've unmuted myself. Yes, there we go. Yes, this kind of follows the question that I was asked and talking about, you know, the change. And I think there has been a change, I will say, in terms of how the department is dealing with mental health in general. But I guess more specifically related to today's topic, I was wondering, I would like to know, do you feel you have the tools and supports you need to specifically manage climate-related anxiety? And if not, what is one key resource that is missing or inaccessible?
That's a fabulous question. I think as all the speakers have alluded, it's a complex issue, and we face an array of emotions that impact individuals differently. We're lucky to have many resources available to learn the literacy of climate change, to find ways to get involved in initiatives. There's lots of resources on mental health. But one area that I think we need to put more stock into, and it's done in dialogues like this and in these settings, is discussion on mindset and discussion on transformative skills, or soft skills is kind of, I like to refer to them. But to go through this work, you need to develop the skills of empathy, of care, of humility. And I think the emphasis in our careers and by management and senior staff should be on development of these skills. These aren't just soft skills in comparative to a technical skill on the side. These are critical aspects to ensure change management around the culture of psychological safety, and specifically for longevity in the careers of all of us, and especially youth engaged in climate. We often ask the youth, or at least I've so often been told, you know, you're going to solve the problem. This is on you. And that can be extremely daunting. And it can also make me want to turn away, because why is it just my responsibility? But in that, you have to think for the longevity of these careers to have these voices that we need at the table, and we need all of them, every generation. We need to be able to show up at the table with compassion for each other, with the ability to sit in the grief as a sign of an interconnected self, because we don't grieve what's going on if we don't care. And that inspires hope for me. People care, but to come to the table of these informal and formal dialogues and share those emotions are incredibly powerful and shouldn't be seen as lesser than the technical skills also needed for this. So I think focus on that would be really crucial.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you to all our panelists. One of my pet peeves as well is when older generations say what brings them hope is youth, because it's not just about us. We need everyone to be contributing. And I don't want to be responsible for anyone's hope. So really appreciate that perspective as well. So we're gonna move on now to questions from the audience, which you can ask in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also vote for the questions that you want to have asked by using the thumbs up option. So I will turn now to the Q&A function. And the first question that has come up is about AI. I think so far the three questions are all around values and ethics, so definitely a theme that's coming up today. But we're seeing an increased push to integrate generative AI into our workflows. So the question is about how do we navigate this considering the environmental impacts of these tools. And there's kind of an emotion or a feeling here about being hypocritical, which can be really frustrating when we're not seeing the action that we need on these issues. So does anyone want to jump in on the question of AI and the ethics around that in the workplace?
I can certainly start. This is a really interesting question to me. For background, I live with ADHD, and from an accessibility stance, ChatGPT has made huge strides in my ability to have longevity in this career and in the work I do. That being said, I think fundamentally, this comes down to how we look at our public service values and ethics and the requirement to consider all of the different types of impacts that any decision might have. And what I mean by this is that, similar to what Rachel is saying, we have so many different aspects that connect us. We have different, we're complex continuums of different personal experiences, and we'll have different ideas of what should be done and how. But to come back to it, it's how do we start to look at the values of all different Canadians and how they interact with our world and our decision-making process? And how do we ensure that we're asking the right questions when we're trying to introduce new technology, when we're trying to introduce new policies? Are they considering the nexus of interactions that happen between climate change, biodiversity loss, human health and safety, accessibility? They can't be done in silos anymore. So I think to that degree, it's using the tools, GBA plus, our strategic environmental economic assessments, and also redefining these tools and making them consider those intersecting points better and more clearly.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Erin. Yeah, I think one of the pieces that is coming out more and more is the importance of considering the interconnectedness of all of these issues. And of course, there are so many solutions out there, but a lot of solutions do have impacts that we have to think about as well. So making sure that we're able to choose the best solutions that are equitable, support sustainable communities, and all that is super key. I don't know if anyone else is a big AI person and wants to jump in. Otherwise, oh yeah, sorry, Paul, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, not to jump in as a big AI person,
Okay.
but I mean, just to consider it more in general terms, it's a tool, and just like there are so many tools, and every tool that we use has a pro and a con. And I just like the questions being asked, because it's just good that people are being mindful of it, right? So there is definitely a need. I think in AI, I think it has potential to be very beneficial. But yes, everything has a cost to it. So, you know, artificial intelligence, but I'm always thinking about climate change. Like I said, it's a it's a human caused thing, so it kind of needs a human caused solution. But not that humans can't use tools. So, I mean, this isn't the only thing. Like, I mean, it's think like another common one is like why are we still flying in airplanes? Like maybe we should all just stop. Like, yeah, we could all stop, but is that realistic? Like we still need to do that. We don't really have the alternatives yet. And I think with AI, I think we're still kind of figuring out what it can do and what it can't, what its impacts are. So I think maybe just it's good at this point to be mindful of it, but not to feel guilty about using it. I think there are definitely benefits there in terms of compressing a large amount of data and helping people communicate and talk about the issue. And so I think there are definitely benefits that are there. Do I know enough about it to say what those are comparative to the impacts? I do not, but no, I do appreciate the question.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, definitely important point about ensuring we focus on human-centered solutions as well as human-centered stories. I know storytelling has come up before, but that's one of the best ways of engaging people. So something to think about there as well. I'll turn over to the next question, which I'm going to combine two questions because they have both come up, and this is also a big question that I wrestle with a lot. So I'm really interested to hear what people have to say, again, around the theme of values and ethics. So a question that's coming up in the chat is, can I continue to work for the public service if and when decisions seem to consistently not align with our personal values? So this might be something in with an election coming up that people are starting to think about. How do we keep faith to stay and try to provide fearless advice, like Paul was talking about, and implement loyally? And sometimes the decisions that governments make can feel like they might be harmful. Of course, all decisions have different impacts. So bridging in the other question to make sure I don't miss any piece of it, what to do and how we manage emotions or befriend them, like Rachel was talking about, when maybe there are limits that we have to put on how we show up around climate in our personal lives because of work and making sure that we're upholding our values and ethics as public servants. So any suggestions that folks have or personal stories about how they're able to kind of navigate this line of caring about these issues and also of being a loyal public servant? Paige, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. This is also something that I think about a lot, especially as I'm fairly new to the public service. I've been here for around a year, just over a year and a half now. And these are two questions or with many more attached to them that I do reflect on regularly. And I think the most important thing to remind yourself is that climate change is nonpartisan, and yet sometimes climate action gets treated as a political activity. And I think that is unfortunate a lot of the time, because especially as a young employee, I feel that taking climate action, for the most part, is an excellent example of what loyal public service looks like. You're trying to improve the future for all people, and both currently here now as well as in the future. And I was sort of thinking, I kind of had an idea that this type of question was going to be asked. And so I took a look at some of the public service values and ethics, and I thought that some of them are super aligned to taking climate action. One of them, it's even in the expected behavior for the public service value of stewardship, and that is to consider the present and long-term effects that your actions have on people and the environment. And to me, that reflects, that includes climate action. And another one is the respect for democracy. And this is kind of becoming an emerging challenge under climate change, is that modern democracy faces a variety of different threats by a lack of climate action in many ways, because it transcends borders, it transcends boundaries, and it acts at a timescale that is completely not attached to electoral cycles. It's not attached to anything that is, these kind of human bound things that we think of. And so I think that in terms of the other thing to remember is that the federal government isn't the only place where climate action happens. So if you sometimes feel perhaps like things are out of alignment for you, this isn't the only place where climate action happens. Local governments are doing amazing work on climate action. Community groups do wonderful work in terms of stewardship or grassroots leadership. You can take all kinds of like beautiful forms of climate action, like block parties or all of these different things to strengthen community ties and act on climate in really creative ways that are not out of alignment with public service values and yet are not necessarily happening at the federal level, if that makes sense. But I'm going to leave it there. That's sort of where I sort of go to often. But I know that Rachel, Aaron, and Paul probably have other ideas as well for this.
Thanks so much, Paige. Yeah, I invite others to chime in, and also want to point out that several people on the call are involved outside of work, and find creative outlets as well. So finding ways to contribute and have meaningful engagement both in the office and outside of the office is an important way of helping to navigate climate emotions during this time. But Rachel, I see you've unmuted if you want to go next.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw in some thoughts. I love what Paige said about having these different spaces in our story, like these different settings, these different places where maybe we could feel like we're making an impact or taking action, and recognizing that there's different roles that we each play in our story, and sometimes you can do or say something in one space that you can't in another, but that I think the trouble is when it feels like those are in complete contradiction or conflict with each other, and that is, I think, a great opportunity to reflect on your values and your choices. But I'd say for me, like, I'm constantly in that state of contradiction, just being a white person in Canada, just being a person who participates in capitalism, like a lot of the things that we are sort of required to just as part of when we were born, who we were born to, and the communities we belong to. And so instead of just having this kind of feeling of guilt or shame or dissonance around our narratives, narrative dissonance is kind of a concept that I like that goes beyond cognitive dissonance. It's not like we're ignoring these contradictions, we're pushing them to the back of our mind. We're living in this dissonance. We're trying to make it make sense. But sometimes the ways I do that is to think, what can I do in this role that I can't do if I wasn't in this role? And what can't I do in this role that I can do in another space? And every person, from the Prime Minister of Canada to everyday person, like I feel like most of the time, I think can ask that question, because we're all limited in different ways, and we all have spheres of influence and power. And so sometimes it just means putting on a different hat, putting on a different coat, metaphorically speaking, and adopting a different role, and accepting, embracing the fact that our lives are full of contradiction and complexity. And there is no simple answer, and each moment might require that reflection. But it doesn't mean that you're in the wrong job, or that you should have climate in your title, otherwise you're not making a difference, or something like that. There's so many characters in this story, and we really just need people to step into their role, not try to find the perfect ones.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really, really important points. I think all our speakers want to weigh in on this one, so I'll turn it. Aaron, do you want to go next, and then over to Paul?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick, but Rachel is inspiring me too, around the sense that sometimes we feel we need to do everything all at once right now. And I always say, your body's like an ecosystem, and we all have, and our public service is like an ecosystem. We all have unique functions and parts, and it's about working together most effectively to deal with these issues. But your cardiologist isn't going to do your dental surgery. Your dentist is probably not doing your heart surgery. And it's okay too that we have different spheres of influence, like mentioned. And one thing I just wanted to touch on is, at Environment Climate Change Canada, many of our jobs are climate jobs, but I think a lot of people feel that their job isn't a climate job. And I think there's a lot of scales of influence, whether it's from reduce, recycle, reuse aspects to how decisions are made. And I think we have a lot of different levers that we can pull. So we're not always limited just by what we feel our day-to-day position looks like. And there are so many communities within the federal government as well that you can join like the National Youth Network to expand those groups and your field of advocacy in that sense and impact, and also protect your longevity in your career and protect your psychological safety, because you can't do everything all at once all the time. So find where you can, find where you make an impact. And part of it's sitting with those uncomfortable moments frequently as we go through this journey, which is going to be for most of our lives, if not everyone's lives all the time as it ever shifts.
Thanks so much, Erin. Paul, do you want to weigh in on this one as well?
I do. I'm sure I don't have very good words to form this thought, but I guess maybe just provide maybe a longer term perspective, you know. And I think about this not specifically related to climate per se, but in general, like why be a public servant and why stay in when sometimes you're feeling challenged with you know your personal feelings and those kind of things, and sometimes government priorities are changing, those kind of things. So um, I guess I'm coming at this as an Indigenous employee, and I'm sure everybody's done the mandatory training. You understand the relationship between the government of Canada and the Indigenous people in this land. You know, it is a challenge sometimes, you know, at various times of, you know, just being, you know, an Indigenous person in this government of Canada context. So I, it's a challenge, of course. So you know, there's a lot of people that say, you know what, it's not for me. That's fine. So think about your role. So we have you know, change from external, different levels. In the public service, you know, I just find that there's a certain role you can play. There's a certain amount of influence you can have. There's a certain ability you have to provide support and influences. And you know, amongst Indigenous employees, sometimes you know, often people's like, if not us, who? Like if we're not going to be in here to direct change and affect, you know, some of these challenges and you know, influence how these decisions and policies are implemented in certain ways, then who does decide that? So, you know, it is a difficult thing. It's also, you know, no judgment on people who decide, you know what, that's not where I better put my energy. But you know, if that is kind of where you want to direct yourself, then you know, if there are times like if we are talking about different changes in government, you know, I've been through a few. It's it's fine. Like, you know, my personal opinions don't always align with every government in charge, and it never fully do anyway. You never will. Like, but in terms of what you want to do as a public servant, you're doing your service to the public. What is your role? So just consider what's within your scope that you're responsible for. Can you reframe your you know, how you're trying to push your, you know, those things that are important to you, or redistribute your energy. So, you know, it's a lot about supporting other people. So if sometimes you feel stuck, sometimes you're able to support others to be able to do things. But anyway, yeah, I probably talk a lot more about this if just coming at it from a different perspective. But you know, the public service is it's a big organization, and you know, you there are a lot of different ways that you can apply yourself to for the betterment.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul, for sharing that perspective as well. Yeah, we definitely need people who care everywhere, whether it's in the federal government, other levels of government, other aspects of society. And something that I remind myself as well, even if I'm not sure if I want to be a public servant my entire life, I am learning a lot about how decisions are made, how policy happens in Canada, how we can advance these solutions that will be helpful no matter where I end up in terms of kind of areas of impact of theories of change. So that's something that I try to keep in mind as well. Thanks, everyone. I'm really glad that we got to have that discussion today. So another question that's getting a lot of thumbs up is about any recommendations for dealing with people when they label you as a Debbie Downer for thoughts on climate and the future. The person asking this question lives in Alberta, so it can be challenging to have those conversations in spaces where you get kind of labeled as just being a negative person as opposed to being realistic. So any views from the panelists on that?
I'm happy to start. I was born and raised in Alberta. It's a big reason I went into environmentalism, though not maybe for the reasons you would think. I thought I would be an internal actor in oil and gas. I recognized it employed a lot of my friends and family, so it played an interesting role in how I was raised. But I also recognized there was need for reform. But I find when I go home, I get into this situation a lot, and I have two pieces of advice around it. Firstly, I think there's a diverse way that Canadians value our world, whether that be from a monetary sense, whether it's rooted in different knowledge systems and what we care about and how we are raised. There's so many different ways that people see the world. And I've started trying to enter those conversations, less so of let me convince you and more so, can we openly share the different ways we value the world? And can we find a common ground where if you're worried about the prosperity and your livelihood is dependent on this resource, that is a diverse value. And we can have a conversation about how your value is important in your career and your livelihood is important. It's not just shutting down different viewpoints. It's how do we come to the table to agree on a next step when we might not have agreed to making our way there. And my second point is boundaries. I think it's extremely important to set your boundaries and protect your space. There are times when it's okay not to engage in those conversations and to protect your well-being in that sense, to process the emotions and feelings that you need to process, but you do not need to be the answer for every conversation. It's okay to take the time you need to make sure that your space and your well-being is prioritized.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Erin, for that reminder. Super important to prioritize that. Rachel, did you want to add?
I love what Erin said about like finding those boundaries. And part of what I was thinking was like this Debbie Downer label, I think especially affects young, especially female presenting or are women, people who are kind of supposed to be happy, cheery, like not negative. So there's part of me that just wants to be like, no, enter your angry, outraged phase, impatient, like embrace that. Like that's a good place to be. But do that in a space that's supportive. Don't do that around people who are going to judge you for it. Find your community that will kind of accept those feelings. That's one. And I think the other piece for me is, and I'm from Saskatchewan, so again, similar to Erin, kind of like firsthand experience, sort of wandering into these conversations, sometimes accidentally, sometimes on purpose. But I think for me, having a genuine question, having a real curiosity with the person that I'm talking to, and not just a soapbox to stand on or a message that I'm really passionate about convincing them of, helps me engage with them more authentically. And I think that people get the sense from you when you're actually trying to have a creative conversation. Like you don't have all the answers. Like you want to know, I wonder what the future of this province is going to look like. I wonder when and if we'll make smart choices for the next generation. What does that look like to you? How much do you feel like we're locked in? Like there's a lot of common ground when you can find the spaces to get past those identity barriers, I think. But it usually helps for me to actually be curious about the person I'm talking to and not just intent on convincing them of something, like Erin was saying.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, curiosity is a really good way to approach these conversations. So thanks for highlighting that. There might be other views from the other panelists, but we have a similar question. So I'll add that one in here, which is how you deal with climate change denial from family and friends, and how it can feel really discouraging to talk about ECCC and environmentalism. So any strategies for navigating those kind of discussions that can sometimes lead to conflict.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Yeah, sorry,
start us off on this one. Yeah, I've been in this situation many times with family and friends, and also very recently with strangers as well. I love talking to strangers, and it's always kind of funny. You strike up a conversation with someone, and then at some point you get into what do you do for work? And when I say I work at Environment and Climate Change Canada, I always get a variety of reactions, but I always find it interesting, whether you're talking to family and friends or talking with strangers, is to not start necessarily from a place of climate change, because oftentimes also it is a very emotional thing for people. People might feel, a lot of people feel like climate change is coming from one perspective. They feel like it's coming from people who are typically younger, more left-leaning perhaps, and that automatically for them might make them shut down. And so when you're talking to family and friends, I always like to start from, again, this kind of relational place, because especially if they're family and friends that you're close to, you have an existing relationship outside of your work that you do with ECCC. And so starting from perhaps some of those values, if people value, their families, for example, start talking about, I'm really worried about how this is impacting you, or I'm worried about how this is impacting your children or your grandchildren or your relatives in some way. So that relational aspect for me has been really helpful, or also personalizing it, saying like, I'm really worried about this, and you don't have to say climate change specifically, because that's also one of my favorite things to do, is find ways to talk about climate change without naming it that. I'm really worried about like drought or something this summer, and I grew up in a more agricultural community, so that was something that was also very front and center as well for a lot of people who might not necessarily be like into the climate action sphere. So I think, yeah, managing relationships with family or friends who might not necessarily be on your side is just starting from that, that personal, emotions based, sharing your feelings about it is really, really important, and has been successful for me at least.
Thanks so much, Paige. Paul, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to cover, I think my main point was just covered. I think it is that relational aspect. So yeah, just trying to make that connection, like talking about the issue in terms of, well, first of all, I want to backtrack and say, just sometimes you have to embrace being the Debbie Downer. There is an important role for being Debbie Downer, but balance yourself because don't be Debbie Downer all the time. So you have to recharge. So no, just in terms of connecting and with people, in terms of their interests. So it's not like you're trying to change them, like putting it all on them. Like, of course, that's like that can come across as antagonistic or putting blame on someone or those kind of things. And obviously, human nature is like we're going to close up, right? So yeah, it's just a matter of reframing the conversation in terms of things that are important to people, like. You can, whether that's, focusing on, what are the, side effects of addressing climate change, like when you restore your relationship with the environment, like, do you like clean air? Do you like clean water? Like, maybe people are into like taking their boat out and those kind of things. So, just having the conversation around those kind of things instead of, necessarily diving right into a global scale climate science, we're in for doom kind of thing, but just kind of gently opening in. But on the other side of that too, I'd say in terms of friends and family, this might be one of your boundaries. Like there are times where like you just don't need to convince every single person, and also accept that there's a percentage of the population out there that you're not going to change their mind. So be mindful of your own energy too. So sometimes that's with your own friends and family. Sometimes that can be some of the hardest conversations to have. So yeah, so think about that relation, whether it's your relationship with the environment or your relationship with your friends and family, and relationship with yourself.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, lots of clapping emoji reactions on that one. So appreciate you adding your views. I think, Erin, you might have wanted to add to that, and I'll also kick off the next question to you if you want to bridge the answers about how you manage negative climate emotions to avoid feeling burnout at work. So that could be related, but bringing it back to the workplace as well.
No, I think my points were touched on by wonderful panelists, so I'll focus my attention on this one. And I actually have an interesting tool for this as a practice in kind of your own inner awareness. This is something that I talk a lot about when I speak on psychological safety in the workplace. There is a concept called the ACT matrix, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, but there's 4 quadrants to this, and I'll lay it out that quadrant 1 is who and what is important to you. And in this context, it could be to your psychological safety in this setting and to your burnout. Is it spending time with family? Is it being engaged in advocacy work? Is it being outside in nature. And then analyzing conversely, what gets in the way of that? What internal or external narratives? You can write down the quotes exactly if you want, but what pops up that puts you into a space that you want to move away from those emotions? And when you come from there, you have two directions, and neither are inherently good or bad. But direction one is to move away from that discomfort. And sometimes that can be through avoidance. It can be through kind of disconnecting from the problem. And sometimes we need that to protect our well-being, and we need to take a moment for ourselves. But the other way is to think, what gets me back to square one? What gets me back to who and what is important to me? For me, I know it's spending time in nature with my family. That brings me back to a place that I feel good and rested. Sometimes it's just not neglecting basic necessities. I'm eating and feeding myself well to be in a good physical and mental state to show up and do the work. But it's identifying your needs and how you get there through practices that are already fulfilling to you. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can reflect on that and hold space for the time we need to grieve and to feel that and to sit with the discomfort, as well as the ways we can move away from it when we're ready.
Thanks so much for sharing some of those strategies, Erin. If you have any links to those resources, and this goes for everyone, there's a question about resources, so feel free to share those in the chat as well. Paige, over to you next.
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of the things that Erin was talking about in terms of what really works for you in terms of managing burnout. For me, the arts are also a really important part of how I manage my own climate emotions. Having some sort of creative practice has a way of tapping into your emotional self in a way that perhaps other things aren't necessarily able to do. And that's why I started, shameless plug, that's why I started the Sword Fern Collective with my friends. We do a bunch of arts-based work outside of ECCC, and we help people find different art forms to process their climate emotions, or even to realize that some of the things they're feeling are climate emotions in the first place. So the arts are a big thing for me, and having some sort of creative practice. For me, I'm a musician. I think the other thing that I think sometimes people are afraid to do is to perhaps use your sick time for mental health and self-care. And so don't be afraid to step away and to take care of yourself, because you are able to do that and you have the resources to do that. And so don't be afraid to take time for that self-care and step away, because then you're more able to come back fully yourself and not feeling like you're stretched thin in a million different directions. So that one's a bit simpler, and one that I am happy to employ.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paige. Yeah, super important to push through that guilt that some of us feel, to make sure we're taking the space and recharging our batteries and not trying to pour from an empty cup. Rachel, did you want to add to that one too?
Sure, I'll throw in a couple of ideas. Love what Erin and Paige have shared so far, and mine will be similar. For me, I think for me, there's a difference between sort of like what I do to manage like the acute, really, coming on strong kind of feeling that I just need to deal with before I can deal with anything else, versus like building this lifelong practice of befriending my emotions for a sustainable, engaged life that's surrounded by this theme. And so for the acute moments, like in the moment, I think body and breath are two things that I think about. Like, how can I reconnect to my body and some kind of somatic practice, some kind of movement, going outside? Those are things I lean on. How can I tune into my breath? What are some quick breath work exercises that might help me regulate in this moment? So those are the two B's for the kind of acute moments. But for the long term, I have three P's: people, power, and purpose. So for people, like finding my people, I think helps me avoid burnout, so that we can support each other, remind each other to rest, and I find that creative practice that Paige mentioned. Tapping into my sense of power is useful for me in this burnout phase, because I think burnout for me often comes from that feeling of powerlessness, meaninglessness, like it doesn't matter anyway, so I will just tap out, or I'm the only person who could ever solve this problem. I have to be the overpressure. And so I think thinking about what I really do have power over helps me avoid either of those extremes and makes me feel responsible without making me feel to blame or guilty. And then thinking about my sense of purpose and reminding myself that this should be fun sometimes, not all the time, not every day, but I don't want to build a life of suffering like around the things that I'm passionate about. I want to build a life of vibrance and love and friendship and creativity. And so the more I can infuse my climate work, my climate storytelling with those things, the further I feel from burnout. So that's my advice. Body and breath, people, power, and purpose.
Oh, such good takeaways. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And we're government employees here, so we like acronyms. So the BB, PPP, that works for us too. There's a quick question page in the chat if you wanted to answer about what kind of musician you are. Otherwise, we'll turn to the last question because we only have a few more minutes here today. Is about mobilizing both in the workplace and outside the workplace with friends, families, and neighbors to recognize that the climate crisis requires systems change, and that requires participation from everyone. So it kind of goes back to the idea about climate change becoming politicized, that losing people. So how do we bring people into the narrative to show that everyone has a role to play when we're talking about this, bigger than just no more plastic straws and that kind of thing. So Rachel, do you want to start us off? And then feel
My
free,
last word
everyone,
today, sure.
jump in. Yeah, if everyone wants to share just like one kind of minute of takeaways as well, then we can wrap up after this question. Thank you.
Smart, I'll pop my last time. One more just like framework that I use for storytelling that I think helps bridge this like personal story with the bigger political, more global story. It's the same 4 questions. What matters? What's at stake? What do we want? What'll it take? I can ask myself that personally to think about what matters to me, what the stakes are for me in my lifetime or just in my day. I can think about what I want to help create or what I want to avoid. And I can think about what it'll take from me in this moment in time. And then when I bring that story to others, to a shared story, you know, what matters to us? What's at stake for us? What do we want collectively? And what will it take of us collectively? To me, that helps me like create this connection point between the stakes of the story, which are existential in nature, which are really big, and still trying to find an action that goes beyond recycling or avoiding plastic straws. You know, we need these to be in line to have that narrative fidelity. And so those are 4 questions I keep coming back to in my work and in my play, to just kind of help connect these dots. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share.
And they rhyme. Thank you, Rachel. Erin, do you want to share 30 seconds of some response or takeaways?
Absolutely. I think interconnectedness is always what I'll come back to, but as a lover of creatives too, and as a poet, what I had written down here was, you know, when the world's yelling contradictions about what is to be done, I like to listen to the trees, to the knowledge systems rooted in stewardship and connection to nature. We have infinite opportunities to learn from nature if we stop and listen. And I think from there, it's the creation of shared positive visions. It's an incredibly powerful tool to get together with different viewpoints and talk about what our vision for the future is and what we long for our world to look like in the future, and find those commonalities and those desires to protect the world and also protect what we have in the world through that shared positive vision tool.
Wonderful. So powerful. Thank you, Erin. Paige, do you want to share any last takeaways? And then over to you, Paul.
Yeah, for sure. For the person that asked about the music, I play bass trombone and I play classical music. And don't worry about not feeling productive because it feeds your soul. You don't have to be productive all the time. In terms of my overall takeaways, sometimes I think that being someone who works in climate change, especially as a young person, these can feel so overwhelming and you can feel so isolated, but make moments for potentially being vulnerable if you feel like it's a safe space, whether it's with your coworkers or with your loved ones, and try and create those opportunities for connection to talk about your climate emotions, because strengthening our communities is what's going to help us flourish in our climate future. So I will leave it there because there's been so many beautiful things said today as well.
Thank you, Paige. Last words, Paul, and then I'll wrap us up with a bit of resource sharing at the end.
All right. It's already been mentioned, but I just want to reiterate. I think it's important. you're not alone. Sometimes it feels like we are, especially if you're working, at home or, small offices and those kind of things. Sometimes it feels like it's all on you. It's not. There's a lot of people working on this, and every once in a while, I think you get together, talk to people, you hear about accomplishments. So that's another part is, just think about this. This is not all on you. It's a team effort. There are other people on your team. Just make those connections, and know that they're all there. So, like every team, it's okay to sit on the bench for a while someone's out there, taking on the heavy work and recharge and then go out again. So that's just how teams work. It's a long game, so you do have to pace yourself. Enjoy today. Don't feel guilty about it. There's lots of good things out there today. Like that's why you're recharging and making sure that we have that future to look forward to. Like, what is it that you enjoy? Is it music? Is it, there's people that give you positive energy? Is it walking in nature, the bird singing, those kind of things? Yeah, just find those sources of positive energy, recharge, and get ready to handle it again. Just ride those waves. Just don't let it get too low, because it is a long game and it's not all on you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm definitely feeling energized and inspired coming out of this discussion. So I really appreciate the contributions from all of our panelists. I learned a lot, and I'll definitely be revisiting the recording on the Fin YouTube page. So recommend checking that out after the event as well. We'll send around an email tomorrow. So thanks so much again to all of our speakers. On the next slide, we wanted to note that there are several resources available for learning more, including a series of climate literacy courses that was developed by our team at ECCC and is available to all public servants at the Canada School of Public Service. So definitely recommend checking those out. A few other resources to highlight, as well as resources that folks have been putting in the chat and were mentioned today. Some great readings and tips that we encourage you all to explore as you move forward on your climate emotions journey. So as a network, we wanted to share one more thing, which is that we're hoping for this to be just the first of many conversations about climate emotions in the public service. So to that end, we are proposing a vision for climate care in the federal family, which is that employees' climate emotions are a productive outlet for aligned efforts at work and in our communities to address climate change while building resilience and hope. So to help advance this vision, we're launching today an interdepartmental community of practice that will meet a few times a year with membership from youth networks and other interested parties across government departments to discuss and share resources, experiences, invite speakers, have interactive activities, and implement this vision for climate care with your help. So on the next slide, if you're interested in further discussions on climate emotions, you can sign up to join the Interdepartmental Community of Practice on Climate Anxiety using the link that we'll share in the chat. And we also encourage you, of course, like we talked about today, to talk about climate emotions. Most important thing you can do with your colleagues, friends, and families to take breaks from the urgency of it all, and of course, to take action when you have capacity. And also a little plug here, if you are a member of ECCC, an employee of ECCC, we encourage you to join our network and our executive committee. We can be reached at the email in the chat, and you're invited to join our Teams channel as well. So that brings us right on time to the end of our Earth Day 2025 event. We have a quick survey that will take less than 5 minutes to complete. The link will be shared in the chat and also distributed to all those who registered after the event. So thanks so much for joining us today. We're grateful to all of our panelists for sharing personal stories about how they manage and befriend their climate emotions. And once again, resources will be available after the event on the Fin Wiki page and YouTube channel. So have a great afternoon and evening, everyone, and we wish you a very green Earth Day. Thanks so much.